Hello there patrons, welcome to yet another bonus video. I hope you've all been having a great start to 2026. There's Martha. Hello. And welcome to all the new patrons that have joined since the Beatles anthology video. Thanks everyone for supporting that one. It's good to be back in the swing of things. This month, the winning topic was a look back on the Beatles Cartoon TV Show, which has been submitted by quite a few people over the past few months, but no one was more persistent than Andrew Kuda. So well done, Andrew. I think you've had a couple of winning topics to your name at this point. Very good innings on the Elliot Roberts Patreon. Now, before I get into it, I just want to point out something that I sent out in a text post recently, but will reiterate here. So coming up in the last 2 weeks of February, I'll be taking a 2-week trip to Thailand and Singapore. I normally make these bonus videos in the last week of the month, so next month it means that I'm going to have to actually make the bonus video in the first half of Feb, just because I don't want to be working when I'm on vacation. But what I thought was, instead of immediately sending out another poll for more topics, I'm just going to make the psychedelic experiences option the topic for next month. It only lost by a couple of votes in the January poll, so I think it makes more sense to do that one next, and that video will be out by around February 17th or so. Or maybe earlier, hopefully not later. I hope you're all cool with that, and don't worry, by March we'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming with a new poll to vote on. Cool. Okay, let's now get into the topic. So the Beatles cartoon. It's a strange little oddity, isn't it? I personally was never that big on it myself. I never watched it when I was a kid or anything. I knew of it. Like, I recognized the character designs and knew that the personalities of the cartoon Beatles were all exaggerated and simplified versions of their real life counterparts. But it wasn't until I made that video on all of the Beatles films that I actually looked into it more. I watched a few episodes back when I made that video and it got the odd chuckle out of me, but it's not something I've ever felt the need to return to. What I would have liked to have done for this video is read the book Beatletoons, the real story behind the cartoon Beatles by Mitchell Axelrod, which is the only published book I could find that's dedicated entirely to this TV series. Like I said, these Patreon videos get made in a week, so there just wasn't enough time for me to buy this out of print book, get it delivered, and read it in time for this video. I mean, I couldn't even find a PDF of it online. Thankfully, the legend that is Peter Lane helped me out with some extra info about the series and sent me some better quality versions of several episodes, plus some additional footage. If you're an online Beatles fan and you don't follow Peter Lane, you gotta rectify that now. This dude is responsible for some of the best Beatle-related posts of the past few years. You may remember him as the one who figured out the specific Beatle harmonies that were sampled in Now and Then, which I mentioned in my video for the song. He also just makes really top-tier Beatles brain rot parodies, my favorite being the Paul McCartney PS5 giveaway.
Hello fans, it's Paul McCartney. Due to a shipment error, we have over 4,000 PlayStation 5 consoles to give away for free. This is exclusive to my fans to show my appreciation. All you have to do is click the link and you will receive your free console.
I believe he's also a patron too, so thank you so much, Peter. You've really come in handy this month. Everyone go follow him on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and yeah, thanks again. I've also found a few good articles on the series, such as this Rolling Stone one and this terrific one from Woman's World, where a lot of the information in this video is taken from. So before I share my thoughts on the cartoon itself, allow me to run you through the history of how this odd little series even got the green light in the first place. The story starts with a guy named Al Brodax. Brodax was a producer of early 60s cartoons like Crazy Cat, Snuffy Smith, and Beetle Bailey.
Great balls of fire! Can't a man take a little nap?
Which had all been adapted from comic strips made by King Features Syndicate. The most well-known of these would of course be Popeye the Sailor Man. Then, like the rest of America did on February 9th, 1964, Al Brodax tuned into The Ed Sullivan Show, where he witnessed the debut of the Beatles on US television and knew he had to get involved in what he believed would be a burgeoning phenomenon. Despite Brian Epstein getting hundreds of calls that evening, somehow Brodax got through to Brian's secretary, where he said this: "Hi, my name is Al Brodax, and I think I can help the Beatles." At this point in 1964, the Beatles' longevity in culture was by no means guaranteed, so their management was far more open to these more outlandish opportunities, because who knows when they'd all dry up completely, you know? This is similar to Brian Epstein agreeing to unprecedented but perhaps unwise merchandising deals that did the actual Beatles out of their royalties that they unquestionably deserved. By November of 1964, the Daily Variety published an article announcing that the show would begin airing in the autumn of 1964 1965. This meant that in less than a year, Brodax's team needed to find artists to design the characters, find people to write the scripts, hire the right voice actors for the part of the Beatles, find sponsors, and lock down a studio where they could animate episodes on a deadline. Brodax actually managed to pull it off, with companies like Quaker Oats and the Mars Candy Company agreeing to sponsor, often teed up by the Ringo cartoons saying this:
"The first half of this show is brought to you by
Quaker Oats cereal, along with ABC signing a network distribution deal. Basically, the idea for the show was to turn the Beatles into animated versions of themselves, and each broadcast would consist of 2 5.5-minute episodes where they'd get up to their own wacky hijinks built around one of their many songs that were being released at a lightning-fast pace. When Mitchell Axelrod interviewed Al Brodax for his book, Brodax told him, quote, "We did a lot of theme things around subjects such as ghosts, cowboys, ships at sea, Transylvania, and things of that nature. We had 10-minute meetings about the stories, and that was it. Then it was the job of the writers to turn these stories into scripts. And throughout the entire 39-episode run of the show, only 4 writers were employed to pen the stories: Dennis Marks, Jack Mendelson, Hayward King, and Bruce Howard. The animation was completed in a small London-based studio called TV Cartoons, or TVC for short. In terms of who was responsible for creating the now iconic designs of the Beatles themselves, that task was given to a mop-topped 19-year-old kid named Peter Sander, who worked at TVC. The studio gave him a few images of the Beatles upon which he was to base his easily drawable design. According to this Woman's World article, one of the assistants at TVC, Norman Kaufman, remembered the model sheets designed by Peter. Quote, "Peter used what had been the typical Beatles stereotypes at the time, where John was seen as the leader, Paul was the most poised and stylish, George was portrayed as loose-limbed and angular, while Ringo was seen as the nice, gentle, but always rather sad-looking Beatle." And according to Hal Erickson in his book, Television Cartoon Shows, an Illustrated Encyclopedia, the animation techniques borrowed from Richard Lester's quick cutting style, which he employed as a director of A Hard Day's Night and Help. Quote, "The frenetic cuts gave the series its breezy pace and comic impudence, which often had to compensate for some distressingly sloppy animation and infantile scripting." The trickiest part of pre-production was definitely finding the right voices for the Beatles. There were a few strongly held opinions as to whether the Beatles should be voiced by actual Liverpudlian actors to provide some authenticity to the show, but Al Brodax wasn't really feeling good about this, as he knew this was going to be a show mostly for American audiences, meaning that he was concerned that American children especially would have a hard time understanding such a foreign accent. Brodax wanted an Americanized version of a Liverpool accent. And so, after some toing and froing, a compromise was struck whereby both American and British voice actors were employed to portray the Beatles. British actor Lance Percival was hired to voice Paul and Ringo, and American voice actor Paul Frees voiced John and George. I am of the opinion, which I believe is shared by most people who have watched the show, that Lance Percival does an acceptable job at voicing McCartney and Starr.
"He'll have to go, he's broken the elastic again."
Hey, we've stopped right outside a hotel for the little people.
But Paul Frees sounds just so completely wrong for John and George.
I'm not going to be superstitious any longer. It's a photo finish. They have to develop the picture.
It's a photo finish. They have to develop the picture. You know how John Lennon sounds. Lance Percival adopted what he described as a bright and cheerful demeanor for Paul, whereas Ringo was the low-voiced fall guy for the humor.
Oh, what's the difference? Dropping a G never hurts anybody.
And I think it works pretty well for the characters. Actually, it's very similar to Yellow Submarine in that sense, where Paul and Ringo also sound the better of the four.
Ringo's voice is a bit like this, like every bad Beatles impression that you've ever heard.
What's wrong with the way I pronunciate then?
George truly sounds so cursed.
I just can't sign another autograph.
I just can't sign another autograph. Like, how hard is it to just get a guy who can go, "I just can't sign another autograph"? I suppose that does sound a bit like Ringo.
Who, me?
But yeah, Paul Frees, despite being an in-demand voice actor, sounds nothing like John or George. John doesn't even end up sounding British.
We're locked inside a diving bell and some silly nit is dropping us into the ocean.
And George sounds like the guy in your class who thinks he can do really good impressions, but any accent attempt just ends up sounding more or less the same. In this case, still mostly American with maybe some limp Irish or Scottish woven in.
Let's save it for when we do The Flight of the Bumblebrain. promising children.
So with only a few months until broadcast, none of the animation or voice acting had begun, and so an intensive production period ensued, which meant that the detail and quality of the animation left a little something to be desired, but it did get done. By July of 1965, TVC and King Features were keen to show the actual Beatles their progress on the show. And on the 30th of that month, one day actually after the premiere of the movie Help, the Fab Four got their first look at themselves in cartoon form. On a first impression, after watching a couple of episodes, the band were actually pretty chuffed with their animated depictions. But then their concerns began to bubble to the surface. Lance Percival recalls nervously watching John and Paul chatting to themselves and overhearing Paul ask who was doing his voice, with Ringo later coming up to him to say, "You've made me the dum-dum." To which Percival had to stress that it was the writers who made that choice. But Ringo did have a point. I mean, more or less every episode of the show revolves around Ringo's stupidity being the catalyst for whatever hijinks they get up to. This screening session eventually became a big party with plenty of food and liquor, but nobody could find John Lennon. He was soon found under a buffet table, not quite feeling like being a Beatle. I'm sure the very idea of that, what with the Help movie and now this cartoon, was starting to play with John's sense of identity. But then from the point of that screening onwards, the Beatles, at least while they were still together, were only ever dismissive of the cartoon. Then on Saturday, September 25th, 1965 at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the show finally premiered. The pilot episode was called A Hard Day's Night and followed the Beatles trying to find a quiet place to rehearse.
It's no use, John. We can't rehearse with these people hanging about.
That settles it. We have to find somewhere else to rehearse.
Lads, I know the perfect place.
Which turned out to be, obviously, Transylvania, where they naturally stumble across all sorts of classic movie monsters who unexpectedly delight in their music. Once the credits for that part have rolled, it's time for the sing-along component.
Now comes the part of the show where all you boys and girls get a chance to test your vocal cords. We call this the sing-along. All you kids out there will now have a chance to sing this next song right along with us.
This part features a couple of gags while introducing the song, which in this case is Not a Second Time.
Sing, kids.
You know you made me cry.
With lyrics up on the screen for the audience to participate in. The next title in the first episode was I Want to Hold Your Hand, which features, funnily enough, the Beatles visiting an octopus's garden, and the sing-along is Devil in Her Heart. I don't know if it's a garden actually, just a place where an octopus is hanging out. 2 weeks on from the first episode airing, ratings numbers were in and the Beatles cartoon was a hit, opening with an almost unprecedented 51.9% share of the viewing audience. This success allowed for the show to become a Saturday morning cartoon staple, airing new episodes all the way up until October 21st, 1967, with continued reruns of these 3 seasons until September 7th, 1969, less than 2 weeks before John Lennon privately announced to the other members of the band that he wanted a divorce from the Beatles. Rather fitting, really. Eventually, MTV began rerunning episodes in 1986 and 87.
Beatles cartoons bring me back to my youth. It's great.
And its final official broadcast home was on the Disney Channel in 1989, airing Fridays at 5 p.m. Now, I've heard other people say that they remember watching this as children in the 90s, but I have no idea where or how that would have been the case, as it's never been officially released on VHS or DVD. Now, the songs utilized in the show went all the way up to the Beatles' Revolver album, which is pretty funny when you think about it. These were songs written under the influence of LSD and the London avant-garde, and yet were still being lip-synced by these two-dimensional mop-topped versions of the Fab Four. Like, one of the sing-alongs in the penultimate episode is She Said, She Said, which features lyrics lifted directly from Peter Fonda's Acid Trip, like, I know what it's like to be dead. Very funny to think of little children singing along to this on weekend mornings like some sort of bizarre Kids Bop hallucination. Like in 1965, parents are popping their head in being like, oh yeah, I want to hold your hand, that's cute, okay, she loves you. Then 2 years later, turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. Must be thinking, what is going on with this damn cartoon? Eventually, once the band had broken up, the Beatles' opinion of the cartoon softened, at least for John and George. In 1972, John Lennon was quoted as saying, I still get a blast out of watching the Beatles cartoons on TV. And in 1999, George Harrison said, I always kind of liked the cartoons. They were so bad or silly that they were good, if you know what I mean. And I think the passage of time might make them more fun now. Interesting that he used the phrase the passage of time, because I don't think they've been made more fun now. In the early 1990s, Apple Corp bought the rights to the cartoon and have been sitting on them ever since, despite calls from fans for decades to release the show in some format. The only nod to its actual existence in modern times, as far as I'm aware, was in 2004 when McFarlane Toys released a line of figures based on the cartoon series featuring all 4 band members with their instruments. 1 year later, in 2005, they released a box set featuring cartoon figures of all 4 band members with instruments, plus an alligator figure, speakers, and a radio. I believe the alligator features in a couple of the episodes. I had a look, and these are going for thousands of dollars on eBay, meaning the show still has its dedicated fans in 2026. And Peter, if you are watching, I would not be surprised if you yourself have obtained these figures somehow. But I think it's safe to say that the series is never going to receive a physical or even a streaming release. Why, you ask? Well, let's now talk about the main problem with the Beatles cartoon. Yeah, so one of the quirks of the TV show is that the cartoon Beatles often find themselves in all sorts of different countries and continents from around the globe. From Africa to Japan, Polynesia, Spain, Egypt, India, and in every single one of these places, the 4 white men writing the episodes and the animators along with them depict the people and culture of these locales in the most grossly stereotypical fashion imaginable. Same with the depictions of Native Americans and Hawaiians. I mean, it's just diabolically racist. I'm not going to show specific clips because obviously that would be super insensitive, but if you are curious, basically all the episodes are on YouTube. Obviously, this was a show from the 1960s, and this kind of cultural insensitivity was still ripe in cartoons even in the goddamn 1990s. That's not me letting them off the hook or anything. I mean, I think much of the rushed or poor quality animation that people speak of in books and articles about this show could also be a veiled criticism of the racism of the series. But yeah, I mean, this was very much the vibe back then. All that's to say, this is probably the leading reason as to why this show has never seen an official re-release, and the further and further we get from the Beatles in cultural memory, the less need and desire there will be to have this show repackaged for the modern public, because there's just no way any of this shit would fly today. And good, it shouldn't. And it's not a case of, well, they can just release the non-problematic episodes. Great, you'll have about 7 or 8 of them to watch. Still think it's worth it? Look, the Beatles cartoon is a funny little footnote in the band's incredible journey throughout the 60s, but that's really all it is. A footnote. It wasn't mentioned at all in the Beatles anthology, not on the DVD version, nor on Disney+. It hasn't aged well, and there's debate over whether it was even any good in the first place. Okay, I'm just editing this video, and I think I'm coming across as too harsh on the Beatles cartoon. Editing this Patreon video, I have been watching a lot of these clips from these episodes, and I'm noticing some funny lines. It's zany, it's wacky. Falling, yes, I'm falling. And truth be told, there are also some impressive sequences for like how fast the turnover was for this cartoon. Like the Strawberry Fields Forever sequence. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going. Is very cool. It's artistic. Like, I don't think the fucking Flintstones were doing stuff like that, which, you know, there is plenty of in this show. Thanks, by the way, Peter. That's a 16mm print of the Strawberry Fields Forever sequence. So it's not going to look any better than that, folks. And, you know, but for all those reasons and more, that is why it definitely has its place in Beatle history. It's just when I say a footnote, like imagine you're writing a book on the Beatles. Are you going to dedicate an entire chapter to the Beatles cartoon, or is it feeling more like a footnote? Anyway, yes, it is historically relevant due to it being the very first weekly television series to feature animated versions of real living people, which is definitely an interesting component. But if you want my opinion, the true legacy of the cartoon is that it paved the way for a genuinely significant entry into Beatles lore, which is the film Yellow Submarine. Now, you can all watch my Beatles Cinematic Universe video if you need a reminder of why that film is so special, but it must be said that without one, we wouldn't have the other. King Features Syndicate, who produced the cartoon series, also produced Yellow Submarine. George Dunning went from producing the TV show to sitting in the director's chair for the film. Al Brodax produced and contributed to the screenplay, as did Jack Mendelsohn. And Lance Percival even voiced Old Fred.
Now, whatever you do, don't touch that button.
Which
button.
That one.
You can certainly feel the DNA of the Saturday morning cartoon in the film, but its effect is much richer, much more colourful, and better yet, doesn't feature any overt racism. So that is the Beatles cartoon. I'd love for there to be more about this series to mention, but I truly think I've highlighted everything significant. However, if you have any extra facts or tidbits or favourite moments from certain episodes, please do sound off in the comments because I'd love to hear from all of you on this one, especially if you've read Mitchell Axelrod's book. If there's anything missing from that book that I didn't mention, let us know in the comments. Now, this is the part of the video where I normally let you know what YouTube video I am currently working on. But for now, I just want to say that I am writing a bunch of notes for multiple Beatles-related videos. I'm very much in my Beatles bag at the moment, which is pretty funny to hear coming from me, like isn't that always the case? But no, I've really been in a big Beatles mood recently, and I've got multiple videos planned, but they're all in the very early stages at the moment, so nothing really to announce just yet. Some of these videos are long, some of them are short, but they're a while away just yet, but they're gonna be good. Sorry to be cryptic, but that's just where we are right now. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all again in a couple of weeks where we'll be talking about psychedelic experiences. All right, bye everyone.